Well, I hope you have your Bible tonight. Mark chapter 14 is where we're going to be, and Mark 14 is a lot of narrative in there, so we are not going to read all of what's in there. So I hope that you will take the time to read Mark 14 and go back and review some of the things. And we're going to stick mostly to what we see happening to Jesus in this chapter, although there are plenty of other things in there. So grab your Bible and let's go ahead and look at Mark chapter 14, this turning point that we see. We have days in the course of our history that have become kind of like a turning point, a time that has turned the tide of humanity. In our own country, we have things like the signing of the Declaration of Independence. There's no going back. It was a death sentence when they did that. The attack on Pearl Harbor that got us into the war, 9/11, things that continually, once something happened, it was a major turning point. And maybe there were some things in your own life that you deal with, and these single events, these single days could change everything. Maybe it's the loss of a child or a friend. Maybe it's a dramatic financial loss or a relationship change. Maybe it's you're rejected or abandoned by someone and you don't know why. You weren't given the why. A lot of these things can change us and change things that we do dramatically, and they're a turning point. And we got to decide, what are we going to do with these turning points? Read with me in Mark chapter 14. Let's start in verse 1 and 2. It says, "Now it was 2 days before the Passover and the feast of the unleavened bread. The chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him. For they said, 'Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar from the people.'" It's still Wednesday afternoon in the life of Jesus. Friday is the cross. And Mark chapter 14 is going to take us all the way into Friday. So there's a lot going on in Mark. There's more in other Gospels that kind of fill in around Mark's narrative. But it's 2 days before the Jews commemorate the Passover. And the Passover to them was huge. It was the biggest thing they did together. And they're required to come to Jerusalem. And there's so many Jews in Jerusalem, and the first century historian Josephus is trying to impress on Nero how huge this is for the Jews and how many people this event took. And he estimates that there were, just in the number of sacrifices they're required to have a lamb sacrificed, he says he estimates 256,500 number of sacrifices. So if there are 10 people to a lamb, 256,000 lambs, roughly 2,700,000 people in Jerusalem from the surrounding areas there to celebrate the required Passover. And so there's a lot of people represented in Jerusalem, and what is about to take place when they leave the city and go back to where they're from, the news of what just happened will spread. And it'll spread quickly about Jesus. And this is part of God's design. It's hard to believe. It says that the teachers of the law that says do not kill, are plotting to kill Jesus. They could take no more, and many could not get enough of Jesus. And Jesus is eating, it says, at the house, following this in Mark chapter 14, starting in verse 3. He's eating at the house of Simon the leper, probably a former leper, and he's anointed by Mary. We know her name in John chapter 12, and it's a very expensive perfume of pure nard. It's worth almost a year's wages. And this is a sacrifice from somebody who's paying attention to the words of Jesus when he's saying he's going to leave them soon. He is dying. And she wants to honor him and show Jesus how much he's worth to her. So in this selfless act, you can see her view of Jesus. And Jesus acknowledges, and we're not reading all of this passage, her contribution. He said, "You will be remembered." anywhere the gospel is preached. Her generosity will be spoken of in her memory. What about ours? Would Jesus speak of the love that we have for him and how generous we're willing to show? Would he be moved by what we're willing to give up for him? And is there anything we're not willing to give him? Judas, witnessing this, he complains about the waste and others join him. And he's not thinking about the poor, as he claimed. This money could be sold and given to the poor. That's not his purpose. It's not his real intention. His objections were selfish because he's the one in control of the money and how it's spent. And the opportunity to have even that much more money drove him. And the waste didn't belong to Mary, it really belonged to Judas, who had the opportunity to spend all this time around Jesus, and instead he was only interested in pleasing himself and honoring himself. We can be caught in the same trap. And what a waste that would be. Look at verse 10. Then Judas Iscariot was one of the 12, and he went to the chief priest in order to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money. And he sought an opportunity to betray him. So Judas moves from greed to betrayal. And the priests of God are happy to hear about the betrayal of the Son of God. And Satan is certainly at work through Judas in John chapter 12. And he's going to hand him over for 30 pieces of silver. 30 pieces of silver just happen to be the price of a slave, a servant, in Exodus chapter 21. And then Jesus is among them as one who serves. He is the greatest servant. And the greatest servant of all is betrayed for the price of a slave. And Judas, his friend, is the one doing this. Jesus already has a place for them to eat the Passover. In Mark chapter 14, 12 through 16, he's saying, I've already prepared a place, just like he arranged with the donkey to be acquired. Now he has a place taken care of where they can meet. And Jesus, even at the end of his life, is still taking care of people around him. And look at verse 17. So they come and they eat this meal together. And when it's evening, he came with the 12. And they were reclining at the table and eating. And Jesus said, truly I say to you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me. And they began to be sorrowful and say to one another, is it I? He said to him, it's one of the 12, one who is dipping the bread into the dish with me. For the Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born. It says Jesus earnestly desires to eat this meal with them in Luke. And besides the meal itself, Jesus is just wanting one more moment alone with his closest followers. He has one more lesson to teach them. And we know in other accounts he washes their feet. He serves them, and then he tells them to do the same to each other. And there's a lot of emotions taking place. A lot of, things that they don't understand what Jesus is going to actually do. And is he going to actually die and be gone? Jesus speaks to them not of their commitment, but he speaks to them of their betrayal and their denial that is about to take place. Later in the garden, in Mark chapter 14, verse 27, he says this shepherd is going to be struck and the sheep are going to be scattered and they're all going to fall away. And this is the picture he's painting of the rest of this night and after this meal. So they're sharing the Passover, and then in the middle of this Passover, he takes, verse 22, and as they're eating, he takes the bread. And after blessing it, he broke it and gave it to them and said, take, this is my body. And he took a cup. And when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank of it. And he said to them, this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I say to you, I will not drink it again in the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it anew in the kingdom of God. This meal that they're eating, it has a lot of symbolism for them about why God asked them to remember the Passover. They're remembering the grace and the deliverance of God and all these little items that are on the table, from the lamb to the salt to the herbs to the 4 cups. And these things all were deeply meaningful to them, and God didn't want them to forget. But in the middle of this meal, Jesus is about to deliver. He's going to give them something greater to remember than their deliverance from Egypt. And he's about to deliver all of mankind from sin, not just from slavery in Egypt. And so what he's about to do, he says, with his death, he's going to make a new agreement between God and man. He's going to pay for our freedom and their freedom. He's going to do this and establish this new covenant with them. And so Jesus takes this unleavened bread on the table and he tells them, this represents my body. It's going to be broken for you. And then he takes one of the cups. There's 4 at this meal, and they represent all these promises and blessings that they see out of Exodus chapter 6. He wants them to remember specifically. He says, I want you to take this cup, and I want you to know that this is the blood of my covenant. It's poured out for many. And without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sins in Hebrews 9:22. And we needed the blood. And these things now have new meaning, not the items that they remember from the Passover, but Jesus has totally given them a new assignment for these items. And now things like the temple and the priesthood and now the Passover, these things are going to end. And in their place, he's establishing something more. And the church begins to meet after the resurrection. And it says, we begin to meet weekly and share in this memorial together. What Jesus did becomes central to what we do. And faith requires reminders. And Jesus gives us reminders, gives us very powerful ones. And this is a reminder that we take every week, and it's full of hope. And it's reminding us of the bond we have to Christ, the covenant he made between us and God. And it bonds us together as the body of Christ. And it's amazing just how unifying this practice has been to remind us of for the last 2,000 years. And one day, Jesus says we will share it again with him in his kingdom. Look at verse 26. And they've sung a hymn. They went out to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus said to them, you will all fall away. For it's written, I will strike the shepherd, the sheep will be scattered. But after I'm raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. And Peter said to him, even though they fall away, I will not. And Jesus said to him, truly I say to you, this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you're going to deny me 3 times. But he said emphatically, if I must die with you, I will not deny you. And they all said the same. Imagine how hard it must have been to hear this from Jesus, how hard it must have been for Jesus to say this to them, knowing it would be true. That these men who became closest to him were about to betray him and deny him. And after all these years together, he knows their commitment to him is about to be tested. And so will ours. If we're going to follow Christ, our commitment to him will be tested. And Peter insists he's different. He will never do this. He emphatically tells him, and Jesus says, your denial will be sharper than your insistence that you would never deny me. And if only our intentions matched our actions all the time, even our emphatic ones. But they often don't. They go to the garden in verse 32, and they go to Gethsemane, and Jesus says to his disciples, sit here while I pray. And he took with him Peter, James, and John, and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to him, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch. And going a little farther, he falls on the ground, and he prayed that if it was possible, the hour might pass from him. And he says, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but you will. And he came and he found them sleeping. He said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Did you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray, that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And again he went away and he prayed, saying the same words. And again he came and he found them sleeping. For their eyes were very heavy, and they didn't know what to answer him. And he came the third time, and he said to them, Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise and let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. And we can't understand the physical exhaustion that Jesus has, the emotional stress that his body is taking from his upcoming trials and crucifixion, but really the toll of being betrayed by those closest to him. What that would do to your body physically. And he is obviously tired, and they are in their sleep. Jesus does not go to sleep. But he's always had this connection to the Father instead. That has been the source of his strength and his power. And this is where it comes from. And he knows if he is showing us, prayer makes us strong. And Jesus is asking for another way, but he's still willing to carry out the will of the Father. In John chapter 17, we hear his prayer in more detail, and he's praying for his disciples, the ones who will need strength for what is coming and what will come after he returns. He prays for himself, he prays for us, and he prays for those, he says, who will come to believe in him. That's us. The hour has come, and this is the end. Verse 43. Immediately when he's speaking, Judas came, and one of the 12 with him, in a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and scribes and the elders. And now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, The one I kiss is the man. Seize him, lead him away under guard. And when he came, he went up to him at once and said, Rabbi. And he kissed him. And they laid hands on him, and they seized him. But one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. And Jesus says to them, Have you come out against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching. You did not seize me, but let the scriptures be fulfilled. And they all left him and fled. Judas is leading a large armed crowd of hundreds sent by the chief priest. I want you to notice who's not here. The chief priest, the scribes, the elders of the law. They did not come. They are not here. They're afraid to come in person. They're afraid to arrest him in the temple, even though they had such control of the temple. They're afraid to act against Jesus. They know and can't deny the power that he has. And so they send a crowd to arrest him. And this is why Judas gives them a signal to who Jesus was. And Peter, the one predicted that would never deny Jesus, attempts to fight for him. And is telling that Mark doesn't name Peter in this attempt because his account comes from Peter. And Peter is not going to give his name, I'd imagine, but he is named in other Gospels. He's strongly rebuked by Jesus for his attempt. Jesus allows himself to be taken. And as he predicted, all that are with him flee and abandon him. Jesus is ready to face what is ahead. So they do a number of things. Look at verse 53. And they lead Jesus to the high priest. And all the chief priests and the elders and scribes came together. And those two things entail a lot of things. Several high priests. One a former high priest, and one the current high priest. And they've taken him to both. And all the chief priests and these elders and scribes come together. And Peter's following him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest. and he's sitting there with the guards and warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests, the whole council, were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death. But they found none, for many bore false witnesses against him, but their testimony didn't agree. Some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, "Oh, we heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands," which is in a testimony that even sentenced you to death. Yet even about their testimony they didn't agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst of and asked Jesus, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" But he remained silent, and he didn't answer. And again the high priest asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" And Jesus said, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power, coming with the clouds of heaven." And the high priest tore his garments and said, "What further witnesses do we need? You've heard this blasphemy. What is your decision?" And they all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit on him and to cover his face and strike him and say to him, "Prophesy." And all the guards received him with blows. Jesus is put through 6 trials, some Jewish, some Roman, and these Jewish leaders knowingly are breaking so many laws to do what they're doing to Jesus. And he knows this is illegal. They all do. They're not supposed to meet at night. They're not supposed to have a capital case against anyone on the eve or during a festival like the Passover. People are paid to lie about Jesus. They're not paid, and their laws didn't require them to. They were there to defend someone. He didn't have a defense. He was not assigned anyone to speak on his behalf. And they pretended they have the right to condemn Jesus without evidence. They don't under the law. There's no evidence. And Jesus' own admission is not even grounds for capital punishment. But they did not care. They broke all the laws. The teachers of the law, do not kill, are seeking to kill. And Jesus at first doesn't answer. In most of the trials that he goes through, we find no answer from Jesus. And we see this in Isaiah where he says the lamb before his shears is silent, so he didn't open his mouth. The prophecy about him. And sometimes our response is better off with silence when we're accused. But Jesus is asked 300, he's asked 183 questions from people. He asked 307 questions, but he only answers 3 while on earth. He's always clear about who he is, and even with his own admission, Jesus is not worthy of death. In fact, Jewish law prohibited execution based on a person's own confession, but they were ready to move against Jesus in any way they could. And on top of that, Jesus has backed up his own confession with evidence over and over again. And this is certainly a day that is quite a turning point in the life of Jesus and in our lives. There's a turning point in each of our lives, and there are days we're going to go through that we will face and we will never face them again. And Jesus endures things on this day that not only did he not deserve, but he's never asked for, but he endures them for us. And he doesn't back down from these things that he had to face alone, and he's enduring them to give us a better future. And so when it comes to our own turning points, we have a similar situation to make. Are we going to go through them and lay down our life before Jesus and seek or rather seek our own interests like Judas? Which one? Are we going to say we're always going to follow Jesus like his apostles did, but find ourselves disappointed like Peter? Our spirit is willing. Our flesh is often weak, and we need the help of the Spirit if we're going to follow Jesus. So Peter didn't stay where he was. I love this is not the end of his story. We see Peter making the choice. This night of betrayal was a turning point for Peter as much as it is for us. And Peter goes on to speak boldly about who Jesus is, not denying him, but speaking boldly and going to his own death. He never denies him like this again. This night is a turning point for Jesus towards the cross. It's bigger than that because it's a turning point for all of humanity, for all time.